Welcome to Unbiased and on the Fence. I'm Shane, and I'm joined by my special guest, Eileen Colts. How are you doing today, Eileen?
I'm doing great. How are you, Shane?
I am doing wonderful. Let's see. I do have your links below for anybody that's in the chat and you're not subscribed. Please do so, and I'll mention it towards the end because people are sort of late to get in here sometimes. But we're talking about everyone's favorite subject today: death.
Death, the big D.
Yeah, it's the subject nobody ever wants to talk about, but it's
No.
the death rate, as far as I know, is one per person for the most part. So it's
Yeah, it
something
is. It's
that
100% at the moment.
that's right. So I think it's a topic that is under discussed, and we should talk about it because it's like for it being the unknown of life, because nobody really knows what happens because scientists say that people's near-death experiences and things like that are just oxygen leaving the brain, and I've seen really good proof that says otherwise though with people with different
Me
experiences.
too.
But of course people can say, well, that person's lying or whatever, but the main thing that I can say with 100% certainty is that death is used more than anything else to blackmail people, to force
Yeah.
people, scare people into doing things. And it's really at the heart of so many control mechanisms, whether it be, fear that a politician is going to do something that's going to, put your
Oh,
life at
yeah.
risk,
Blow up the world.
yeah. Or if it's, you're going to burn in hell forever. And nobody wants to burn in hell forever, you know?
I was a good Catholic. I was absolutely terrified of burning in hell. So, yeah, I've got that T-shirt.
Yeah, me too. And the funny thing is, once I got out of religion and sort of let go of all that baggage, I never felt so free in my life. And I never, I'm not suicidal or anything, but I no longer fear death anymore. And it's amazing that I was in a religion that I thought guaranteed my ticket that I didn't go to hell. Yet once I got out of it, I realized how much that I was still in fear of hell and death and all that, even though I was doing the things that I thought would guarantee I didn't go. And you don't realize it while you're in it, you know what I mean? But when
Yeah.
you're out of it, you see how free you are.
Yeah, you follow the rules of your particular religion, hoping that that will guarantee you heaven. And, sometimes the rules are hard to follow all the time. And a lot of people are like, I don't care, I'm going to heaven. And then other people are like, I lied, I'm going to hell. They all interpret it like individually and judge themselves, don't you think?
I do. I really do. And it's funny
Well,
because
go on.
I was going to say that, I dealt with both of my parents died of cancer, and then my wife's father
Oh,
died of cancer. And, you have that time of being with people when they know they're going to die. And it's a little bit different than if someone suddenly dies or whatever, but you get to see how they view death. Now, like with my dad, he had gone into remission for a while because he tried out this tea stuff and his tumor had shrunk and everything. And he was doing great for about a year. And then he went back in for a checkup and they said, oh, it's back. And I'm like, well, let's do the tea again. And he said, son, I'm just tired. I don't really want to go through all that again. And, and I didn't understand it at the time. At the time, I was like, no, drink the tea, live. But
yeah.
I didn't understand how somebody could just be like, I'm just tired. I'm just, this is no way to live, and going through treatments and doing all of this. And
I'm very sorry to hear that. I think it's more painful for us who are healthy and going, but I'm going to miss you than it is for the person who's actually had enough.
yeah,
Don't
and a lot
you?
of times it makes it easier for them when they see that you're okay with it and you let them go in peace or whatever.
Yeah, I lost my husband. He was a lot older than me, and we knew he was going to go, but we didn't know when because he wasn't well. And I wasn't with him when he passed. So I had this terrible guilt of I needed to be there to help him pass. But I've realized I had an NDE 40 years ago, but as I've researched death more, and the spiritual side of death as a process and a new beginning, the closing of one chapter and the opening of another, I realized that a lot of people probably don't want their loved ones around them necessarily when they pass, and others might,
Hmm.
because we cling to them and we cry and we're like, okay, go, but then we're like, don't go. So the best thing we can do for somebody who is passing, I've read from the Tibetans, is to tell them it's okay, it's time, fly, go on, and and that's a hard thing to do when you love somebody.
It is. Yeah, it really is. And, I dealt with both my parents about a decade apart, and it was strange because with my mom, I never could like let her go until after she'd passed. And then I dealt with that whole grieving process. But with my dad, knowing he was okay with it, knowing he was ready to go,
Mm,
I, I actually, when he passed away, I remember falling down on my knees and crying and actually thanking God that that wasn't suffering anymore. I mean, I completely handled both of their deaths opposite of one
completely
another.
differently.
Yeah. And there were so many things I'd wished I'd asked my mom. And with my dad, I really thought about it. I'm like, all right, I got to make sure I ask him all these things that I know, because I'd gone through it once. And I mean, little things like, whether it's a recipe or anything
Yeah,
like that. And I wouldn't even
yeah,
ask my mom because with her, it was like she had faith that she was going to be healed of it. And for me to even ask her something like that, because she was really ultra religious, would
would
have
be
been mean.
doubtful.
Yeah, it would
Yeah,
be doubtful of the faith that she was going to be healed. So I had to stand by that faith alongside of her up until the time she died. But with my
yeah.
dad, he was ready to let it go, you know?
Well, if we were really smart in school, we would number one find out what the gifts were of each child and then let them develop those, whether they were art or music or math, instead of saying every child must pass art, music, math, science, etc. But we would also teach compromise and balancing a checkbook and raising a child. And what do you do when a child refuses to listen? We'd give them life skills as well, but we also, if we were smart, we would discuss death and we would study death and we would prepare for it, much like the Tibetans do. Because the Tibetans truly do believe that you don't die, the soul is immortal. They believe in reincarnation, like the Hindu religion and many other religions. And because it's not the end of your life, they don't celebrate it, but they get ready for it. Like, so when I knew this by the time my mom was dying, but I didn't with my husband or my father. So by the time my mom was ready to pass and she was kind of losing her mental facilities. She was a little bit demented, not much, through the death process, lack of oxygen probably. And I asked her, I said, what do you think happens when we die? Not when you die, but when we die. And she talked about it. And she had less fear by talking about it during the death process than she did when she and I had that same discussion 10 years earlier and she wasn't dying. She was far more reluctant to talk about it because she was like, 75. Whoa, I don't want to talk about it, you know? And when she was actually dying, she perked up and she was ready to talk about where she's going to go next and what she's going to do and being born again because she also was a light worker and she personally believed in reincarnation, that you go somewhere good to absorb your last life, because that takes a while to absorb everything you experienced and everything you learned before you are born again. Now, she was a light worker who believed in aliens, so she wasn't convinced that we will definitely be born back on Earth. She thought the universe is a big place, and she read Parallel Worlds theories by Fred Alan Wolf in the 1980s. So she was like, I might get born into not only another galaxy, but another universe. And I'm like, well, I hope we stay together. I hope I find you. And she's like, trust me, if you love somebody, you will find each other. So,
Yeah, it really can be a beautiful thing. It's just for the people that's sort of left behind. They
yeah.
have to deal with missing them, and so yeah. I mean, I get it. I understand missing. Like Scott, Light Warrior Craig just lost his grandma, and
Yeah,
you know,
sorry, Scott.
I feel bad for him, but on the other hand, I understand that it's not permanent. So it's like someone moved away, and you'll reunite sometime in the future. So it hurts. It's painful. You'll miss them, but it's not permanent like it seems. For a lot of people that think that's it. It's a final thing, and
And
you
if
are your
you
body.
do the research, if you do the research yourself, you will gain the confidence that it's not permanent. Because I wish I could remember the guy's name. He's a university professor. He's passed. Somebody in the chat, because I can't see the chat, guys, might remember his name. And he collected stories for decades from children who remembered their past lives. And he would go and research the facts, like the ones that the BBC did a documentary on him. And if I find the name, I'll send it to you and you can drop it in the link so people can research him, because he's amazing what he's done. He found a child that while the father was changing the baby, so he was under 2, the baby would talk about changing the father. So he'd talk about changing daddy's diapers. And he thought nothing of it. And then when the child was a little bit older, like 3 or 4, and I'm going from memory here, he saw old photos on the table of his grandfather and his grandfather's first car. And he walked up to the car and goes, "There's my first car." And the dad and the mom were like, "What?" And this went on and on and on until they were absolutely convinced that the man's father had been reincarnated as his son. And the BBC did a brilliant job actually documenting all the facts that supported that. So here's the theories. Did the soul of the man's father wait around and enter their child when the opportunity arose during a pregnancy? Or do we have this common collective consciousness, sometimes called the hive mind, but people don't like that because it sounds like insects. This collective consciousness so that the new child could pick up on all the life experiences of the departed loved one. So those are the 2 theories of how reincarnation is possible. What do you think? Do you think
I think that's interesting because I was just listening. She's actually in the chat, overprotected, which is Sherry. I had her on as a guest. I think it was her nephew. Her brother had died at a very young age, and where he had the injury of his death, her nephew was born and had a birthmark. And then I might be mixing up the people, but
I've heard of those birthmarks. Yeah.
Yeah, and they looked so much alike that it's like, what? They look so much alike. And then the way the one died, the other one had a birthmark in the same area of the injury, and it just makes you wonder. And she's going to be on to discuss that. So definitely want to tune back in for that. But I think there's something to it because, like, when my mom passed away, my wife had just gotten pregnant within a month or 2 before she actually passed away. But when, and I always regretted that because I'm like, man, it was my first child. I wished my mom was around to see.
Yeah.
And because I saw how much she loved my brother's kids and stuff, and I knew she would have just loved my kids to death or whatever. But my daughter would do mannerisms of my mom, and it would kind of be freaky. It'd be like, that looked just like my mom the way she did that, But
so who knows? Well, if you read the Seth materials, not many people have read Jane Roberts. She was really popular in the 70s, I think, maybe 80s, 70s, before Ramtha, before Abraham, before it was popular to channel. And if you're afraid of channeling, all the prophets channeled. All the great prophets who channeled the information in the Bible from God were actually hearing and seeing angels. So we've been doing it a long time. And she said that we had soul groups. And a soul group is like a cloud, right? That's just a good way to describe it, even though it's not exactly like a cloud. And that it splinters off into individual humans into an experience. And then on death, they come back and share that information with the group again. Well, and then it splinters off again, and so on and so on. So if you go back to a group, your soul group, and you share your information, and then you're reincarnated, if we were from the same soul group, I could bring information from Shane into my next group, my next life, and you could bring information from Eileen into your next life because we shared the time together in the soul group. So that is really freaky.
Yeah, that
it's
makes
like
sense.
Group reincarnation.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Someone said, let me see, is it Dr. Ian Stevenson?
Yes.
Okay.
Who said that?
Isn't that wonderful?
Joanna. Who said it?
Joanna.
Yay, Joanna, gold star. That's who it was.
I love this whole group thing because at first I didn't know, but now I know. Just mention it and somebody will definitely know.
That is just so cool because I have no chat. I have no computer. I'm holding my phone. I have a little picture of Shane and that's it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yes, but, Dr. Ian Stevenson.
And I'd heard of his work, but I didn't know the name at all.
Well, if you can get a hold of a summary of his work, it's fascinating. And I had a near-death experience that you and I touched on last week was it last week? God, that went so fast. Feels like 2 days ago. And I had it exactly 40 years ago when I was 17, and I'm just about 57. And I had it in Cairo because I was living in Cairo at the time, or Mande, a suburb of Cairo. And if I just tell you my near-death experience, it's not spectacular at all. It's very boring. But what happened was it kicked me off into an area of study where I've been studying near-death for a couple of decades now. And that's the part I wanted to share with you tonight. So should I just kind of tell you the overview of my personal near-death?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, so I was a teenager living on and off in Cairo or in Chicago with my mom, or in Cairo or the suburbs, Madi, with my dad, sharing time with both parents. And it was with Amoco, the oil company, and they used to give us a gazillion vaccines every single year. They really overdosed us on vaccines. So we got all the normal ones that you guys would get. And then we got like smallpox, yellow fever, gamma globulin. What is that liver disease when you turn yellow? We got things for that.
Candace.
Yeah. So I went in to get a booster because we were going to take a boat up the Nile, which is going down the Nile, actually, right? Going south to Luxor. And we were going to be climbing in and out of tombs and rusty nails and wooden, splinters, stuff like that. So they decided to give me a tetanus booster, but they didn't make tetanus toxoid back then in 77. So they decided to give me diphtheria tetanus. And I had already been over immunized with the diphtheria tetanus so many times for living in the Middle East and living in the West Indies, that as soon as the doctor, who was Egyptian but working for Amoco, so we're like in offices, we're in an office building with a doctor and two nurses. We're not even in a hospital setting. And as soon as he gave me the shot in my arm, it burned like fire. I was like, whoa, that doesn't feel right. So maybe there was something wrong with the serum. Who knows? Maybe it sat out in the heat for too long or something while it was being transported. And then I looked down and you could see the serum turning my skin bright red as it moved. It was like water going through my skin. My skin was, just getting redder and redder in kind of a wave. And I was like, oh, this is really bad. And he said, don't worry, that's just a normal reaction. If you've had a lot of tetanus, you're going to react strongly to the booster. And I took 2 or 3 steps out of his office into the hallway, and that was it. It all went black very, very quickly. I don't remember falling. I don't remember anything. The next thing I know, I'm looking down on a young woman laying on a table in a flat examination table in one of the offices. And there's a doctor and a nurse like doing a lot of things to her. And then there's an older man standing over her head, just stroking her head like really roughly, going, please wake up, talk to me, and saying my name over and over again and crying. And I'm like, what's going on there? This is really interesting. Number one, I didn't identify with the body. I didn't know that was me. And number two, I didn't know who Eileen was. So I was floating from the ceiling, looking down like a mirror. So my head was floating above the head, my arms above the arms, legs above the legs, about 6 to 8 feet above the actual physical body. And everything I saw was through a brown haze or a brown fog. I've never seen anything like it before. It was like when you get those thick fogs, they're always kind of white. So imagine a thin fog of brown. And I was just watching what they were doing and saying, because I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know the body was dead. I didn't know it was me. And while I was in, what I had was anaphylaxis, which is called anaphylactic shock. And I got tested before I had my daughter and before I did some travel to Thailand. And they said it was the diphtheria. I was highly, highly allergic to diphtheria. I'd had so many tetanus diphtheria shots that my body reacted in shock to the diphtheria and immediately shut down. no respiratory, no heartbeats, no blood circulating. I don't know about brain waves because they didn't put me on those things that measure brain waves. It's an office. It's a medical office, not a hospital. So I don't know if I still had brain waves or not, but everything else was done, finished, shutting down. Just not even shutting down, just stopped. And when I was in that situation and they were resuscitating the heart and gave me a shot of adrenaline, the doctor was saying, speak to me, speak to me. And I said to him, let me go, and turned my head to the wall. And that's when he gave me a second shot of adrenaline with heart resuscitation, manual, because he didn't have those Kajumi thingies, those little battery, jump starters. I'm sure they would now, but not in 1977. Maybe they were invented, maybe they weren't back then. And as I came to, he just kept having me talk. I just didn't want to talk. I was so tired. And then I had to lay flat for 8 hours, because if I sat up, I'd have a heart attack, because he gave me twice the amount of normal adrenaline to resuscitate a patient. So that would then, I didn't believe him. So when he left, I lifted my leg, and sure enough, my leg was shaking like crazy. So I did lay there.
How old did you say you were again?
17, 1977.
Oh, okay. So
in
you
Mande,
were, okay.
Egypt.
Wow, that is just wild. So what do you think the brown fog was? Have you heard anybody else explain it that way?
Well, see, mine was really boring. So I spent the next, 20, 30, 40 years researching near-death experiences just to see how mine is different or the same. And I didn't get any tunnel because I didn't go that far. I stayed in the room. I didn't get any lights. I didn't get any angelic music. I didn't see a dead loved one, and I didn't see Jesus. So the brown fog, I don't know, but many other people reported that they had no clue while they were watching their surgery, their resuscitation. They had no clue that that was them. There's no pain. There's no sorrow. There's no panic. It's not like you're autistic and you have no feelings. You just feel good. You just feel kind of relaxed. And you're just kind of floating there as a consciousness without a body. And then you're watching what's going on going, oh, what's that all about?
It's more like you're just an observer then.
Yeah. But it's not like you have no feelings, but it's not like you care, And I don't understand that part of it when you don't know that you're looking at yourself. But maybe that's because when in your life have you ever stood out of your body and looked at yourself? We only look through the mirror, and maybe we're not really seeing ourselves when we look through the mirror. We're focusing on the eyes or the nose or the lips. Maybe to be well outside the body and looking from a distance, you can't recognize yourself. So I did the research, and the best book I read about 6 to 8 books on the subject and a lot of articles and a few videos, but lots of articles. And the best book I found, if you're interested, is by P.M.H. Atwater, and it's called Near-Death Experiences, The Rest of the Story. The reason I recommend that book is because, like Stevenson, was it Stevenson, the other researcher?
Ian Stevenson, is that what it was?
Ian Stevenson. Like him, she is a doctor, like a PhD, and she's a researcher. And she spent like 20, 30 years just collecting stories from people who experienced clinical death. So they had to have proof of their clinical death. There had to be a medical record. So she didn't get everybody. There's loads who don't have proof. And she even interviewed children. And all she did was took their information down and compiled it into this book to see what are the similarities and what are the dissimilarities. And what she found after decades of doing this, kind of like Cannon, like Dolores Cannon collected all that super conscious information for decades. And what she found was all children who had a near-death experience immediately and went further than me. They went further than the room they were in. If they went further, 100% experienced a heaven-like place. Immediately. Beautiful, fun, vibrant, bright. People who believed in Jesus, if they got that far, saw Jesus. But people who believed in Buddha, if they got that far, they saw Buddha. They didn't see Jesus. And people saw Muhammad. So, you know, the people reported seeing the religious icon that they loved. Mary, Mother Mary, Mary Magdalene, you know, Saint Joseph, Saint Francis. That's interesting because that means that who you see on the other side is tied to your own mind, your own expectations.
Yeah, I found that
And
too because when I was in church a lot, we had people that had near-death experiences, and I think I there was a special on TVN that I'd seen where it was explaining how this guy saw a glimpse of hell, and how he there was this dark place, and he felt people grabbing at him, and it was this horrible story, you know. And I was sitting there thinking, what's the deal with this, you know? But I think to some extent, I think we carry that baggage with us. If he was raised, and I saw this, you know, I didn't bring it up earlier, but I saw it with my wife's father, who, he was the most recent that, you know, he lived his life the way he wanted. His mom always hounded him about getting saved and going to church and everything. And, you know, I had to admire him because one time I was like, they came into town. I was like, well, you guys are early. I thought you were going to stop at church. He said, well, we just decided to do what we wanted to do. And I had to laugh at him because, you know, his mom was in the house and she didn't hear him say that or whatever, you know, but, you know, he just always hated church, and, you know, he was always fine with it. He, you know, and he carried this baggage around because he had a young sister that had passed away. She got ran over by a bus, and his mom said, you were supposed to be watching her. And he kind of carried this guilt along. So he always smoked pot and drank and just trying to drown the sorrows his whole entire life.
guilt.
He was only like 8 and she was like 5.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So the mom not only hounded him about church, but always had that guilt that she put on him, you know, at that young age. So of course he wanted to be high all the time. I mean, think about, you know, your whole life that you're living with you know, just feeling like it was your fault.
You feel like you killed your sister, but you're a child. So you don't have that responsibility. You can't have that responsibility at 8.
Right. But
you know?
So, and he was fine his whole life, but, you know, towards the end, you know, I could see him get fearful. I'm like, hey, just relax. Everything will be okay. And I was so glad no one else could take care of him during hospice. So me and my wife took care of him. And I was so glad I got to be there with him, and that he wasn't stuck with his grandma, who would have been hounding him, get right before you die. And, you know,
confess your sins. Yeah, he's lucky to have had you and your wife before he died, because I bet you brought him a lot of peace and like comfort. Like, okay, don't be scared. This is a new chapter. You know, I bet you gave him a lot of confidence.
Yeah,
well, here's the most important part, and that grabbing at you thing is actually in there. And I know somebody who had a near-death experience who had the grabbers, and I'll tell you how that works into this research. So the adults who reported a near-death experience, we're talking 4,000 people analyzed over decades. 15%, that's 15, not 50, 15% who went further than the room they were in, because it's actually very common for people to be resuscitated quickly, like me, and never get out of the room. You know, that happens a lot, which is good. That's a good thing. They get your heart started quicker so you don't go too far. So 15% experienced a hellish-like place. They didn't say it was hell, but it was dark, it was scary, it was cold, it was lonely, and occasionally they would like see shadows or entities around them that were a bit scary without describing a demon or a devil. Nobody described a demon. Nobody has ever described the devil, which is kind of a good thing.
What about fire? Did anybody ever describe?
Nope.
Okay,
nobody described fire. It's always dark. It's always the ones who experience it say it was going into blackness, into the void, into nothing, scary, dark. But 100% of them, no matter how good or how bad they were in real life, rather than how they judge themselves, 100% of them eventually moved on to a heaven-like place. So it's like 100% for heaven. And they didn't describe it as heaven. They always describe it as like, you know, green, beautiful orange fields of grass and purple skies. And, you know, they just describe this beautiful, shining place, vibrant with color. And they don't describe it like the pearly gates and a cloud and a man with a white beard approaching them. None of these traditional heaven descriptions are actually coming through these descriptions. And some of that I got from other books as well. But the fact that all people go to heaven eventually is really telling, because the Buddhists, if you go back to the origins of Buddhism, it was called Bon, B-O-N or B-A''N, and there's very little materials left of the Bon religion. Because I think Buddhism really took hold around 500 AD. And the traditional ancient Buddhists believe that you make your heaven or hell on earth through your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions. And you choose your heaven or hell in between lifetimes based on what you think you deserve. What you think you deserve, not what your priest thinks you deserve, not what your mother thinks you deserve. It's what you think you deserve is what you get. And all this research just kind of supports it, because she said that those who went to hell first, or a hellish place first, felt that they deserved it. And those who went straight to a heaven-like place, absolutely on their deathbed, they were ready for heaven. They were like, yep, I'm going to go see grandma and I'm going to go see Jesus. They were ready for it. And here's the sad part. If you were like a bad person who still thought you deserved to go to heaven, they went to heaven too. And if you were a good person who carried a lot of guilt, like that man who thought he killed his sister, they would go through a hellish type experience. Even though you and I judge them as good, if they judge themselves as bad, they would create the hellish-like experience first before moving on to a heaven-like place. Isn't that interesting?
That's extremely interesting. And I find it,
Extremely.
I think, what if, because when I was looking into the law of one, and particularly Hitler, because he's like the person everyone thinks of when you think of, who really deserves to go to hell. If there's a place called hell, who really deserves it? You think Hitler. He's totally,
yeah, with Stalin. Yeah, right next to Stalin.
It's got his name right all over it. You know what I mean? But when I thought about
Nero. They've got Nero with them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we've got a few people that like their name is synonymous with evil, and like Hitler's one of them. But when I was reading the Law of One, and it was talking about he needed a lot of care in the afterlife, because having to go over his life review and to have to experience the horrors from the other side, from what he, the types of torture he did on people, having to feel it from their point of view. That alone, I think, it's especially when you think of how many thousands of people he tortured or whatever, and the people related to them that had subsequently suffered as a result of him torturing their loved ones. Mm-hmm. And just to have to just ponder all of that, would just be a hell in and of itself. Without burning or whatever, he would totally get what he deserves, having to see what it was like from the other person's point of view, each individual. And he would need a lot of care. And, maybe he did show up at heaven first and like, all right, come on back to the room. We're going to take a look at your life, and
hell
you're going to, and we're our own
heaven.
judge. Yeah. And we're our own judge, you know what I mean? Where we go back. So I don't know. It's something.
According to the people who died briefly and came back, mm-hmm. if Hitler thought he deserved heaven, he would be in that book reporting, hey, I went straight to heaven. That's the crazy thing. We judge him and say, we think you need to go to hell, like forever. And of course, nobody does. And that's a terrible thing to wish. I would never wish that on anybody, really. You and I talk about that all the time, where, if a child does something really wrong, do you punish them forever? No. But we would want him to pay some kind of penance for what he did, all that suffering he caused. But in his mind, if he thought he deserved heaven, he wouldn't go to hell.
All right.
That's what people are coming back and saying. It's not necessarily the truth. You know how I say this information and I give you what I've learned, but that doesn't mean I believe it. Nobody has been dead for a very, 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 very long time and come back, because maybe it changes. These are briefly dead people. You're talking 5 minutes max, right? Actually, they've resuscitated people like 20 minutes, right? After they've died. I think the maximum is like 20.
Mm-hmm.
before permanent brain
I think
damage.
there was
I don't know. I'm not a doctor.
I think there was a few instances where people died and they got hypothermia and they were like under the water, and then
Yeah.
they were out quite a while. I'm not sure what
30,
the record
45
is.
minutes. A
Yeah.
toddler in Chicago
Yeah.
was under the ice and resuscitated without brain damage. So the stories we're sharing are brief deaths. They're not people who've been gone 10 or 100 years and coming back and saying, well, yeah, that's how it starts. And then you do this and then you go there. You know, we don't know about that. That's all a mystery.
That's true. And it's also, you got to consider that somebody could have been doing some, like we look at the cabal, and a lot of times we think of them as being so evil and that they know they're evil. But I think in a lot of their minds, it's like the wealth of the evil is laid up for the just. They picture themselves as the just and the chosen ones. And we're just, these people that are evil, and they deserve to do what they're doing to us. And in their mind, they've justified it. It's not like they know how evil they are or how evil we see them. They see themselves as this elite, chosen few that deserves to get all the gold and all the money, and us to be their slaves because they earned it, or they're the pure blood, or whatever it is. You know what I mean?
That's upsetting. That's the upsetting part to me, is that if somebody's truly evil but believes they're good, they don't get punished because they don't expect it. We get what we expect in this life, and we get what we expect in the in-between. I call it the in-between because I know that we have further incarnations, whether it's Earth, another planet, another galaxy, or another universe, or possibly another dimension. We get what we expect in the in-between. And some of these people who are truly evil are so mentally ill and arrogant, they think they deserve, good treatment in the in-between times.
Yeah, and if they, I mean, but if you think about it, at the same time, if they were doing evil and knew they were doing evil, or doing evil and thinking they were doing good, you can see that as being a little more accepted. Like, just if they had a mental illness and they truly didn't realize how much of a monster they become, it's a little bit different, I think, than if, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
because they didn't realize how bad they'd gotten.
And then, like, going back to Hitler, so we see what Hitler did wrong and say, hell for you, mister. You need to at least spend a little time in timeout before you get, heaven and then reincarnated, whatever. But the people behind Hitler who funded him and rose him to power, Germany was completely bankrupt after World War I. And I've researched the current deep state cabal Illuminati, and a lot of their funding came from the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, and the Vatican. So here you got this crazy guy named Hitler, and is he at fault more or less or the same than the secret people behind him who financially supported his rise to power? Now you'd go, why would these people support Hitler? And the reason that they did was they wanted a Jewish problem. They had to create the chaos in order to solve the chaos. They wanted to create a Jewish homeland, which they did. They succeeded in 1945 or 47, whenever it was passed. So they needed to have a reason that the whole world would back that. And they did that by funding Hitler, funding his extremism, probably feeding him his extremism, and saying these Jews, these poor Jews, which I agree, that was a horrible, horrific thing. They need a safe place to go, a safe place to live. So there was a lot of political maneuvering behind World War II. So who's more at fault? I think they're all at fault. And I would put his financial backers in a timeout, a hellish timeout too. But we're not supposed to, because God is loving and forgiving. So just by saying that, I'm being judgmental and I'm not following the path of harmlessness. And really, there is this philosophy that if you want to ascend from Earth and not have to return to learn Earth lessons, you got to live a life of harmlessness. You can't even kill a bug. You can't eat an animal that suffered before you ate him. And you can't judge others like Hitler and the Rothschilds and all of them.
Yeah, and that's tough to do, isn't it? To rise above the duality and emerge at the oneness that we're all part of. And just, it's almost like, you've got an injury on your body, and it's like you can look at them more like an injury that you like them to heal. You don't want to just cut off your arm because it's got a scab on it, so to speak. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's
if we're
like
all one, exactly. Do we our you know, because our finger, I don't know, bothers us or does something that we don't like, do we cut it off and toss it in the fire? No, it's part of us. We fix it.
yeah, totally agree. And it is hard to do, but like I was saying on a broadcast recently, that if you really imagine putting yourself in that person's situation and realizing that you could have ended up exactly like that person if you were brought up in that family and exposed to this sort of ritualistic stuff that they do, and it was just, since the time you were 3, this is all you've ever known. I mean, we can look at other people in other countries and the things they eat, and we're totally disgusted by them. We're like, we'd never eat that. But yeah, you would. If you were born in that family and that's all you'd ever eaten growing up, you would totally be eating these little octopus things and stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's normal. It's normal. It's not a punishment to eat that.
We make a show called Fear Factor where they got to go on there and they're really eating stuff people are eating in other countries on a regular basis. But to us, we've never even seen, that kind of thing. So it's totally repulsive. But I mean, you can take that a step further and look at some of these things they do and realize that if that was all you knew from the time you were a baby growing up, it wouldn't seem so horrific as it does to us. It's just, we weren't raised that way.
Absolutely. It's all from your perspective, but we're all one. So everything, we shouldn't be judging each other so harshly. But then again, in order to, well, I don't want to sound like the Illuminati, keep order. No, but in order to grow and learn, we do have to judge. We have to say, hey, I don't like that, or that's not for me. You know what I mean? So we can't stop judging completely because we're judging animals.
Yeah, it's that same thing. It's like this fine line between judging and consenting. It's like, I don't consent to what they're doing, but at the same time, you can't judge them for doing it because, like I was just saying, it could be any of us doing the same thing if we were put in that same situation.
Yep.
It's easy from this side of it to say, no, I'd never do that. But, the chance of it happening is there. We just weren't put in that situation.
But I like the idea of living harmlessly. That is a really hard thing to do, to be on the planet living. I'm just getting headphones out because suddenly my sound has disappeared. So I'm going to stick some headphones in. To actually, I challenge myself every day to live harmlessly. And you think it's easy? It is not easy at all. The other thing I was going to talk about was a book called Dying to Be Me by Mande1a. Have you heard of that yet, Shane?
Mande1a, you said?
Yeah. Have you read it or heard about it? I think it's a Hay House book.
Oh, okay. No, I haven't. Dying to Be Me, you said?
Yeah, Dying to Be Me by Mande1a. Has anybody in the chat heard of it?
I'll let them chime in on that.
Oh, I can hear you again. I put my little headphones on.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think you might have covered the mic because it did sound a little. I could still hear you, but it didn't sound as clear as it had. So you might.
Yeah, no, it just went boom. It just went out on my screen, and I couldn't hear you, but now I can.
Okay, perfect.
The thing about Mande1a's book, it's a really quick read. It's only like 200 pages. Is she's a doctor, a researcher, and she gets cancer, and she fights it for many, many years, and it spreads to all parts of her body. So I think they said in the end she had about 40 tumors, and on all her major organs. So she was on.
Kev Barker, I'm sorry, says yes, I love Mande1a.
Oh, hi, Kev. Yeah.
Perfect.
So I think she's quite famous with this book now. She was on life support, and she went over. Now, I have a family member who was on life support and went over as well. You can have a near-death experience while on life support without your body completely shutting down. And it's identical to the near-death experiences when your body does shut down. And she went to the other side, which was beautiful. And they told her, her loved ones, whoever she met on the other side, said, you can stay with us or you can go back if you think, you want to go back. And she was like, I can't go back. I don't have a body anymore. That body is finished. And they said, no, it's not finished if you don't want it to be. And she was like, really? You mean I can go back and heal that body? And they said, of course you can. So she came back, woke up, and within 2 months, rid her body of all cancer. She literally got rid of about 40 tumors, and her doctors were amazed.
See, that goes back to healing ourselves. And, I think of when Jesus would do the healing and he would say, no, your faith has made you whole. It's like they healed themselves. He just
Yeah, you heal
facilitated it.
yourself.
And then with the numerous, QHHT stories you hear about where Dolores Cannon would be like, I'm not doing it, you're doing it. It's like your higher self is scanning your body, seeing what's wrong, and you're healing yourself. I'm not, because people was calling her a healer. And she's like, I'm not a healer. I'm just connecting you to do it yourself. And
a facilitator.
Yeah.
And God, amazing. And was it God or was it Jesus who said, physician, heal thyself? Who said that?
I don't know that.
Remember? Yeah, somebody in the Bible, it was either Jesus or God, said, physician, heal thyself.
Somebody can
Don't ask God to do it. And I'm like, really? Because we think we have to ask the angels and God and Jesus to heal us. But then you've got instructions from God saying, hey, heal yourself. Make that happen with your, I don't know, will, mind, higher self.
Mm-hmm. And even the law of one talks about I think they call it intelligent infinity, which is like God energy, and you're tapping into that, and that's facilitating the healing, but it's still you doing it. It's just, you're tapping into the God force that really brings everything to life,
Often when people create a major breakthrough or invention, somebody makes it at the same time across the world. And that's supposedly coming from infinite intelligence, including like music, artwork, songs, masterpieces, science. Yeah.
Yeah, or you'll have this idea for this invention, never do anything with it, but someone else comes out with it right afterwards, and you're like,
yeah,
I wasn't the only one that got it, It's like, it's just amazing. You can tell we're all
Has that ever
connected.
happened to you?
Yes, it has.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, it has.
I had this great ghost story that I told everybody. I was going to write a book someday, and I never did it. And it was about a woman in a scary, haunted place where she's trying to escape like something supernatural, something haunting the place that she thinks is going to kill her. And in the end, it's her. She's the ghost. And she's trying to escape her own death because she's caught up. She's living it over and over and over again. And the ghostly voices that she hears is the child in the house who can see her and who's saying, hey, you got to get out of here. It's time to go. And I was working in media at the time, and I told a lot of friends that story. And they're like, Eileen, you got to write that story. And then, of course, Sixth Sense came out. I was like, oh, that was my story.
Yeah, I can't remember the invention. It was a type of website or something that they ended up, and I was like, oh, well, I didn't have a chance. I think it was Google. It was a big channel or company like Google that ended up. I think it was a calendar thing or something. But I had more ideas that were similar to that. Someone's saying, oh, Secret Truth is saying Hippocrates said that physician heal thyself.
Oh, was that? Are you sure the Hippocratic Oath isn't first do no harm? Was it Hippocrates who said, physician, heal thyself?
That's what Secret Truth says. I don't know. It didn't
Secret Truth knows a lot of things, so I would say I believe you.
And I know the Bible really well, and it doesn't ring a bell with being any kind of scripture, so possibly.
Okay, well, God didn't say it. Okay, there you go.
See, it's a benefit that, I'm stuck with the Bible because I'm like, no, I don't really recall that in the Bible. But
yeah, interesting.
You've read a lot of stuff. So, that's what I was saying the last time you were on. You've read so much that you've got to really, even if I did read something else, I put so much weight on the Bible that it's completely stored in another part of my brain,
And I'm like, who said that? Who said this? Yeah. Yeah, I do have a lot stuck up there, and it does get muddled. It's like,
Totally get it.
But the other thing that I wanted to share with you guys was I had a family member go to a hellish type place, and that family member didn't deserve that. But my family member thought they did. So it's really, really important now, before you're on your last days, to tell yourself, I deserve heaven. I deserve a really good place to go to in between lives. So I've decided, I put this in my video because I did a video on death last week. I'm going to a giant library, a crystal one, full of books and videos and coffee. And I'm just going to hang out in that library, wherever it is, and just study and relax and read and learn. And that's going to be my kind of like heaven, along with my loved ones, my family, my dogs, the people that are most precious to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe it. So chances are when I go, I'm going to go somewhere really nice, very much like what I want, what I'm describing.
I was just reading, someone said, okay, let's see if it's Luke 4:23. Luke was a physician. Maybe it was him. Let me look at that.
Was Luke a physician?
I believe he was. Because
Cool.
wasn't he the one that, let's see, Luke 4:23, Jesus said to them, surely you will quote this proverb to me, physician, heal yourself.
So we got Jesus as
you
well.
will tell me, do here in your hometown what we have heard that you did in Capernaum. So surely you will quote this proverb to me. Well, what proverb is he quoting, though? Is that from the Old Testament, perhaps? For physician, heal yourself? Let's see.
I don't know.
That's strange. I wonder if he was actually was Socrates around before, or not Socrates, but
Hippocrates.
Yeah, was that, what era is that from? Is it before Jesus?
That's Greek, and that's it's kind of hard to say because they were writing a lot of this ancient philosophical text before Jesus was born. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and I think he actually went to Egypt and went other places, even the Far East, and studied and stuff.
They even said Tibet, didn't they?
Right.
Well, when we do another show in the future, I'd like to kind of touch on the Old Testament versus the New Testament versus Gnosticism versus the Illuminati Satanism, because a lot of people are kind of mixing up the beliefs of Gnosticism with occult or with Satanism, and it's not related. It's not the same thing.
Yeah.
And you know how the God of the New Testament is so different from the God of the Old Testament?
Yes.
It's not because Jesus died for our sins and changed God's heart. There is actually a historic reason why, but we'll save that for the next one. We'll do that next week.
Yeah, and I've touched on this before because it's right there in the New Testament. This is things I found out like while I was just, the Bible was the authority in my life, and I didn't look outside the Bible, but within the Bible, you can see why the who we call God of the Old Testament is not the person Jesus called Father. And like you said,
yes,
we will touch on that later, because he actually talked to the religious leaders and said, your father is the devil. So,
oh my God, this is exactly what I'm getting at. But I don't want to talk about it now because we need like an hour just to talk about.
Yeah, we need the whole hour to. And I'll pull
where
the
did they get
the
Hebrew God from the Old Testament versus where did the God of the New Testament come from?
Because I think if people, most Christians, if they could see this evidence, because it's right there, it's from Jesus's mouth. If they see this evidence, it will totally unlock your brain of just the prison that religion is, because you'll be able to see that the religion they teach in most religious institutions is not even biblical. I mean, you can look within the Bible and you can see that what they're teaching is not what the Bible teaches. You can tell they took all these religious writings, stuck them in the thing and said, here's the Bible, this is what it means, but that's not what it means.
That's not what it means.
We'll definitely take some time on that. I think people will enjoy that broadcast, because I feel a lot of people are still tied to that whole religious structure. It's hard to let go of it. It took me years of researching. And so, yeah, I think that would be a great topic.
So we'll kind of look at Old Testament God versus New Testament God, Gnostic Gospels, and Luciferianism and Satanism, because they are so completely different. It's amazing. I don't propose that that anybody do the occult stuff and follow it, but we might at least know what other people are thinking, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, and then even taking a look at the Garden of Eden and the story of the serpent and God and that story and how it relates to there's another one where there was a plague that got put on the people, the Israelites, and then God came back and they said, please take the plague off. And he's like, all right, well, let me hang the snake up, and everybody who looks at the snake will be healed of the plague. And it never made sense that God put this plague on them, and then God came right back and hung the snake up and said, well, just look at the snake and you'll be healed. It's like,
And
God doesn't change his mind. So what's going on?
No, and
here?
who uses the snake as their symbol?
Exactly.
The American Medical Association.
Yep, the caduceus, or I think they call it something like that. Yeah.
Hey, Shane, check it out. They've removed the female snake. They used to have two snakes intertwining, male and female.
The double
and
helix.
Now they've plucked one off, the double helix. They've removed one. And the new AMA has one snake going up the pole. And I'm like, is that a Mandela effect, or did they change it on purpose?
Yeah.
Like, let's remove the feminine principle to healing.
And that would be revealing, like so many other Mandela effects that are just revealing what's really going on. And that would go right along with the shifting to the left side of the thinker, how we've shifting to the masculine and away from the feminine.
But I'm like, did they do that on purpose?
I have to look into that.
Because the powers that be have a lot of power. They can put anything on the internet they want and go, this goes back to 1895. And then they put it everywhere. And you're like, oh my God, did you know in 1895 they predicted that Donald Trump was going to be president? So they have that kind of power to recreate our past online. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, I don't believe it unless I actually see a copy of the book that looks 125 years old. Then maybe I'll believe it.
Then you'll know it's a genuine Mandela effect. Yeah, if the print changes and the Bible changes, you can pull out your old Bible and see that's for real. But so much of it could be a counterfeit. That's for real. They might be, and that would totally fit in line with the types of things they do, where they try to take this phenomenon that they know is real and try to use it to push their own agenda. Yeah,
program us. So that will tie into that talk, because we're talking about snakes. Are snakes representative of wisdom, like ancient Egypt, or are they representative of evil, as in the Hebrew Old Testament and Eden?
Have you followed the work of Matthew LaCroix by any chance?
No, but I've heard the name.
Okay, he was on Leak Project, and what he did that was super interesting. I'm planning on getting him on, but he's busy with his second book, so he's not really doing interviews right now. But he did this whole study on how you can follow the symbology of the snake and the dragon and everything through all the flags and emblems and all the countries and everything, and then you can follow the symbology of the eagle through all of the conquering countries and everything, and you can see it's always been this war against the eagle and the serpent. And even with the Mexican flag, you can see there's the eagle's got the serpent in his mouth, and you can follow
Germany, America,
and it was all symbolic of who was running the government, and it was all between Inky and Enlil.
I know about them. I've read a lot about that.
Right. Well, Inky being the serpent, which is typically about knowledge or whatever, and then the eagle. I got my phone talking to me. And then the eagle, which was about conquering. And he shows how you can follow how the eagle would go around and try to destroy the places that had libraries and books and things that had to do with wisdom and our true history, to hide what the knowledge Inky had tried to share throughout the other governments and in the Far East and stuff, because they got the dragon and all that. But his The Illusion of Us is his book, and
that sounds really good. And plus, if you look at nature, there is a chance that an eagle will swoop down and eat a snake. They actually devour each other in real life, but the snake doesn't devour the eagle, does it?
I don't know.
Interesting. It can. So that would make the eagle the aggressor,
and the
eating
eagle,
the snake,
and the snake the prey. That's got to outwit the aggressor.
Yeah. Okay. Well, hey, we've got plenty of topics for the future. That's for sure.
Definitely. Well, I really appreciate you coming on, and sorry that we got on so late, but late's better than never.
It's fun.
Right?
We used to do this. Do you remember all your live feeds used to be about 9 o'clock at night?
Yeah.
Long time ago? Yeah.
Yeah, and then I'd have like all these comments in the morning. Oh, I missed it. I was asleep. And so,
Yep.
yeah, I need to
Well,
try to
they
stagger
can
them
watch
throughout
it
the day.
tomorrow.
Yeah, that's true. I'm sure I'll get some tomorrow. So sorry for all my Euro viewers, but at least the people in Australia and because there's other places that this probably
Hey,
works out
and we
better.
got a huge promo on Josee's channel because I was in there chatting with them when you texted me. And I was like, Josee, we're going to go live. And she's like, okay. She told the whole chat room. So we got this great promo.
That's awesome. And for you guys that don't know, I also have Josee's link below. So definitely want to subscribe to Eileen's channel. That's one channel on YouTube. And then Josee's link is further down. Josee, the leader of the...
She is the leader of the Lightworker Pack. That is
Yeah.
my therapy room. I'm probably not supposed to say this, but when you go there, you just leave feeling better. You're like, I'm glad I saw you tonight, everybody, especially Josee. I feel better. Go to bed now.
Yeah, definitely a good place to go because she fits in where we kind of tag team back and forth. So
Definitely.
all right.
Definitely.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, and we'll see you next week. We'll figure out a day that works for you. But
thanks for having me, Shane.
No
I hope
problem.
we have fewer computer issues next week.
I know, right? It's crazy.
It is crazy. Much love, everybody. I'll go in and read the chat. I always read it afterwards.
Yes, much love, everybody in the chat. Lots of love and light to all of you guys, and we'll see you in the next one. Have a good one.
Bye. Bye.